Your friends are making a costly mistake. Every year, there are players that destroy your fantasy drafts. But if you can avoid these traps, your odds of winning skyrocket. Here are 5 wide receivers taken before round 7 that'll ruin your draft. And let's start with one of the youngest breakouts we have ever seen in the NFL in Juju Smith-Schuster, who, unfortunately for Juju, has seen his efficiency drop for 3 straight years. He has been outside the top 50 wide receivers if you use the total last 3 years in fantasy points per game. And last year, his yards per out run, wide receiver efficiency, dropped below 1. This 0.92, to give you context, if you're a quote-unquote subpar wide receiver, it'll still be in the 1.5, 1.6 range. This is below 1. This is not good. And that was just last year. Since 2019, he ranks 87th in wide receiver efficiency. And as you may expect, this is leading to less fantasy points. Let me explain. So since Juju broke onto the scene and was the number 16 overall wide receiver as a rookie, became a top 10 wide receiver the following season while playing alongside Antonio Brown. Since that time in 2019, his fantasy points per game have dropped by 31%. And if we were to go in and look game by game, I mean, this is his 2021 game log. There were 0 top 10 performances. His best game was 23rd overall. From 2018 to 2019, his 2 big seasons, he had 10 top 12 performances. Since then, in 3 seasons, he only has 4. But that's not all. Because in an offseason where Christian Kirk and Mike Williams became top 15 paid wide receivers, Juju was only able to fetch a 1-year deal worth around $3 million. Yes, there's a lot of incentives that can get him some more, but this is all he has as a base salary. And for comparison, this is 3 times less than his teammate who signed in free agency, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, MVS, who's earning $10 million this season. Now, here's the interesting part. Juju was taken as the first Chiefs wide receiver off the board in fantasy drafts, and he goes in round 5 as the wide receiver 27. This ends up being 63% earlier than Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and goes as the wide receiver 44. And if you were to continue to scroll, you could see the rookie Sky Moore, who I don't believe is going to start right away. And then you get McCole Hardman, who Juju goes 72 picks before. And McCole Hardman, who's in line to start right now, is the only one of these starters, MVS and Juju, who has time with Mahomes already. So now I have to ask you, do you actually believe that he is this likely compared to the other receivers there to be Mahomes number 1? Now stretch out your arms and open up those earballs, because I have a trendy wide receiver that you need to avoid. Green Bay Packers wide receiver Alan Lazard has actually rose 24% in drafts since June 1st. Your friends expect him to be Aaron Rodgers' number 1 wide receiver, and here's why that's a mistake. Quite simply, Lazard has not yet shown us that he has the skills to be the guy out there. In 5 career games without Devonta Adams, he sees just 4.6 targets per game. And then in 31 games with Devonta Adams, it's 4.5. So he never saw a bump up. He was not generating more targets when Adams was out, which is a concern. We would like to at least see that a little bit. In 4.6 targets per game, it ranks outside the top 60 wide receivers from last year, but it doesn't stop here. Because Lazard in efficiency last year was 80th. I mean, opposed to Devonta Adams, who, you know, Lazard is going to not 1-for-1 replace him, but people think replace him as the wide receiver 1. Yeah, Adams was number 1 in efficiency. So you have to be an efficient receiver, the ability to actually get open for Rodgers to throw you the ball. Ranking 80th out of all receivers is not solid. And this is where it gets concerning for me. As a bigger, decently fast wide receiver, he was only 63rd at beating man coverage. And that's not good, because during this time, he wasn't even generating the number 1 cornerback or a safety over top. Devonta Adams was taking all the defense's attention, and he was still not cracking the top 60 at beating man coverage. So here's your takeaway. Lazard currently goes as the wide receiver 39, the first Packers wide receiver off the board. This is actually 46% earlier than any other Packers receiver in fantasy drafts. And this gap is just too large. You should let your friends draft Lazard in round 6 instead. But first, let them reach on this 4th round wide receiver, because Gabriel Davis is going 39% earlier in drafts since the summer began. And I'll be the first to admit, I thought Gabe Davis, the number 2 wide receiver for Josh Allen and the Bills, a fantastic offense, I thought that he was going to be a fantastic 6th round pick. However, Gabe Davis now goes in the middle of the 4th round, and he's trending to be a 3rd round pick. He's like 4 spots away in the average draft position, and he goes as a borderline top 20 wide receiver, ahead of Allen Robinson, ahead of Brandon Cooks, Rashad Bateman, and all these types of guys. So here's what you need to know. Davis took a leap from his rookie to sophomore year. As a rookie, he was only targeted 13.7% of the time when he was out there running a route. And then last year, 22.2% as just a 22-year-old wide receiver is a pretty good leap forward. So yes, there is some belief that he should break out even further in year 3. But the problem is he's already drafted as a top 20 wide receiver, leaving you open now to mainly just risk. Let me explain. Davis has started 19 regular season games, and a lot of people don't know this. They think maybe it's just been 5 or 6. He actually started a lot of games as a rookie, and then he started a decent amount last year when Emmanuel Sanders was missing time. And over his 19 starts, he averages 9.2 fantasy points per game and just 4.4 targets per game. A lot of people remember the Chiefs game where he's scoring 4 touchdowns and having a monster game, and yes, he was fantastic in that. That is not what's going to happen every time. That is more so recency bias. Numbers that he averages as a starter would be the wide receiver 57 from last year. Now, here's the interesting part. Josh Allen, yet again last year, was the quarterback 1 in fantasy. And the Buffalo Bills were a top 10 passing offense, and depending at the actual statistic you use, top 5 in a lot of metrics. Now, despite the elite wide receiver and the strong offense, Stephon Diggs right here was the only Bills receiver to finish top 40 in points per game. No Cole Beasley, no Emmanuel Sanders, and no Gabe Davis last year. So here's your takeaway. Davis is talented and in a great offense. He's trending to break out. However, he's being drafted at his ceiling, and I'd rather have proven guys like Deontay Johnson and Allen Robinson who go right next to him. And not only should you want those receivers, you should want to fade this 6th round guy. And that man's name is Adam Thielen. Let me show you something pretty wild. Last year, Adam Thielen saw a 14.7% touchdown rate. He had 10 total touchdowns. He was 7th in the league. And then the year prior to that, he saw an 18.2% touchdown rate. I'm going to wrap this all together for you nicely right here. 3rd in the league with 14 touchdowns. So 24 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. He's top 5 in the NFL, top 3 in the NFL in that category. Over those 2 seasons, he has an average touchdown rate of 16.2%. 16.2% of his receptions go for a touchdown. So the average during that time in the whole NFL for a top 36 receiver, as Thielen has been, is 5.7%. So Thielen's average touchdown rate the last 2 years is 3 times more than it's supposed to be. It's a clear outlier, and it's not wise to chase outlier performances. Now check this out. Over these last 2 seasons, when he's finishing as the wide receiver 11 and the wide receiver 14, 45% of these fantasy points these last 2 seasons have come off of touchdown plays, the yardage, the receptions, and the actual points for the score. This is the most of any wide receiver, but now this next stat is pretty concerning. And that's because while he's scoring these touchdowns and his points per game, they're going up, they're remaining steady, his efficiency, the underlying metrics are actually dropping for 2 straight years. This past year, he was outside the top 50 wide receivers in efficiency. This is a recipe for disaster. And not to mention, he's entering his age 32 season, which on average, wide receivers entering their age 32 seasons see an efficiency drop of an additional 25%. This means that Thielen basically has to score 10 touchdowns, assuming his efficiency drops, or more to actually pay off this average draft position. So consider passing on Adam Thielen, who's my 78th overall player. He goes as around the top 70 player, so I'm about 7 or 8 spots below on him in my top 200. And if you'd like my top 200, my tiers, my wants and avoids list, and a whole lot more in the Supreme cheat sheet, and I'm going to throw in a $20 Amazon gift card, you could acquire it by following the link in the description and completing the 2 simple steps. And if you don't like the cheat sheet, I'll refund you $10 minimum deposit, and you can keep the $20 Amazon gift card, a free one for you. So just click the link in the description to learn more and smack your friends around with the cheat sheet. So we want to avoid Adam Thielen in drafts, and we want to beware of this next guy. And that man's name is Devonta Smith, who, let's give this man his roses, as a rookie was fantastic. He was a top 15 efficiency receiver, again, as a 22-year-old rookie wide receiver in the league. There's no doubt about it that he was primed for a second-year potential massive breakout until April 28th, 2022, when the Eagles traded for A.J. Brown in the NFL draft. Let's discuss. It's always an issue if an elite wide receiver is joining the team, but let's see exactly why. Last year, the Eagles ranked 29th in passes per game, and they've shown no indication that they want to throw the ball more, at least not a lot more to get towards league average. And even when they were throwing the ball, Jalen Hurts was 26th in accuracy rating and 31st in true completion percentage. He was not efficient last year. So in a run-first offense with an inaccurate quarterback, you saw Devonta Smith, even though he was so efficient, still just finishes the wide receiver 36. And now here's your concerning takeaway. Even if the Eagles throw more and Hurts improves, Devonta still has to compete with the #1 efficiency receiver since 2019 in A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert, who just last year led all tight ends in efficiency. This is not good news. So it's difficult for me to project Devonta Smith to finish higher than 35 at the wide receiver position, which is better than he did last year now with J.J. Brown there. So there's a decent chance these 5 wide receivers would ruin your fantasy draft. So instead, just let your friends take them. And if you want to see the running backs you should let your friends take because they'll ruin their drafts as well, check out this video right here. And YouTube told me 70% of you watching this aren't subscribed, so double check that you got that button tapped for me.